In the depths of the cosmos, the Zephyrians reigned supreme, their civilization a marvel of intellect and technological prowess. These beings, with their sharp minds and advanced society, were the architects of wonders that spanned galaxies. Among them, Velara stood out, a prodigy whose brilliance was unmatched. She was the pride of the Zephyrian race, the epitome of their genius, and the top student at the Galactic Academy, an institution revered across the stars. Velara's achievements were legendary. She had solved equations that had baffled scholars for generations, designed machines that defied the laws of physics, and her mind was a wellspring of innovation. Her name was spoken with awe, her talents acknowledged by the greatest minds of her world. Yet with her brilliance came immense pressure, a burden she bore alone. The expectations placed upon her were as vast as the universe itself. Failure was not an option, not for Velara, who carried the pride of the Zephyrians on her shoulders. The Galactic Academy was no ordinary place. It was the convergence point for the brightest minds from countless species, a crucible of knowledge and competition. Here, intellect was currency, and innovation the key to advancement. The Academy thrived on the challenges it presented to its students, pushing them to the limits of their capabilities. It was a place where only the exceptional could survive, and where the extraordinary thrived. The halls of the Academy buzzed with the energy of its students, each one striving to outdo the other, to prove themselves as the best. It was a competitive atmosphere, where every success was a step towards greatness, and every failure a mark of inadequacy. The faculty, a collection of the universe's most esteemed scholars, had a singular focus: to mold the next generation of thinkers and innovators. They demanded nothing less than perfection. In this environment, Velara thrived. She was a natural leader, her confidence unshakable. The upcoming, impossible challenge was just another opportunity for her to prove her superiority. This challenge, a problem that had remained unsolved for centuries, was the ultimate test of intellect, a puzzle so complex that even the greatest minds had failed to unravel it. But Velara was different. She was Zephyrian, and she believed that her species' innate brilliance destined her for success. Velara approached the challenge with the certainty of someone who had never tasted defeat. She was meticulous in her preparations, confident that her knowledge and skills would see her through. She envisioned the accolades that would follow her inevitable triumph, the recognition of her genius solidifying her place at the pinnacle of the Academy. There was no doubt in her mind that she would succeed where others had failed. However, Velara's confidence was not without its flaws. Her belief in Zephyrian superiority blinded her to the potential of others, particularly her human classmate, Alex. To Velara, humans were an inferior species, lacking the intellectual refinement of the Zephyrians. Alex, with his quiet demeanor and unassuming nature, was a mere curiosity to her, a student who had somehow managed to keep pace with the Academy's rigorous demands, but who posed no real threat to her dominance. Velara's view of Alex was shared by many at the Academy. Humans, while resilient and adaptable, were not seen as equals in the intellectual arenas dominated by more advanced species. To Velara, Alex was a non-factor in the competition for the impossible challenge, a background character in the grand narrative of her inevitable victory. Yet, beneath the surface, something more complex was at play. Velara's confidence, while formidable, masked a deep-seated fear, a fear of failure, of not living up to the expectations that had been placed upon her since birth. The weight of her people's pride was a constant presence in her mind, driving her to succeed at all costs. She could not afford to falter, not when so much was at stake. As the day of the impossible challenge approached, Velara immersed herself in her work, fine-tuning her approach, leaving no detail overlooked. She knew that success required not just intelligence, but precision and an unwavering focus. Every calculation, every theory had to be perfect. The challenge was formidable, but so was she. In contrast, Alex remained an enigma to her. He was often seen working quietly, away from the spotlight, his methods unconventional, and, to Velara, inexplicable. She paid him little attention, dismissing his efforts as irrelevant. After all, what could a human possibly achieve that a Zephyrian could not surpass? But in the back of her mind, a sliver of doubt began to form. What if she was wrong? What if there was something she had overlooked? The thought was unsettling, but Valara quickly dismissed it. She was Zephyrian, after all. Her confidence would carry her through. The impossible challenge was hers to conquer, and nothing would stand in her way, not even the quiet human who, unbeknownst to her, was about to challenge everything she believed in. In the final moments before the challenge, Valara steeled herself, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The eyes of the Academy were on her, and she would not disappoint. The stage was set, and Valara was prepared to prove, once and for all, that she was the greatest mind in the galaxy. And so, with her heart filled with determination and her mind sharpened by years of rigorous training, Valara stepped forward, ready to embrace the challenge that would define her legacy. Little did she know, her journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test not just her intellect, but her understanding of what it truly meant to be a genius. The day of the impossible challenge arrived with much anticipation. The Galactic Academy buzzed with an energy that was almost palpable, as students from all corners of the universe gathered in the Grand Hall. This was no ordinary challenge. It was a test that had defied solution for centuries, a puzzle so intricate that even the most brilliant minds had failed to unravel its secrets. The significance of this event was not lost on anyone present. Solving the impossible challenge was more than just an academic achievement. It was a chance to etch one's name in the annals of history. As the students assembled, a holographic display in the center of the hall came to life, projecting the details of the challenge. The problem was vast in scope, a multi-layered enigma that combined elements of quantum mechanics, advanced mathematics, and theoretical physics. It required not just raw intelligence, but a level of creativity and insight that transcended conventional thinking. The solution, if it existed, would unlock new possibilities for interstellar travel, energy harnessing, and even the fundamental understanding of the universe itself. Valara stood among the crowd, her eyes fixed on the display. She absorbed the details of the challenge with a focused intensity, her mind already racing with ideas. This was her moment. As the top student of the Academy, she was expected to take the lead, to be the one who finally cracked the code that had eluded so many before her. The complexity of the challenge did not intimidate her, on the contrary, it fueled her determination. She had been preparing for this her entire life. Valara's initial approach was methodical. She began by breaking down the challenge into its core components, analyzing each layer with the precision of a seasoned scientist. Her knowledge of Zephyrian technology was unparalleled, and she utilized it to its fullest extent. Advanced algorithms and logic circuits were her tools, and she wielded them with the confidence of someone who had always been at the top of her field. Every calculation, every hypothesis was meticulously tested and refined. Yet, as she delved deeper into the problem, Valara began to encounter unforeseen obstacles. The challenge was unlike anything she had faced before. It defied the conventional logic that she had relied upon throughout her academic career. The more she tried to apply her advanced algorithms, the more the problem seemed to resist. It was as if the solution was constantly shifting, eluding her grasp no matter how hard she tried to pin it down. Frustration began to set in. Valara, who had always been able to solve even the most difficult problems with ease, found herself at an impasse. Despite her struggles, Valara was determined not to give up. She was a Zephyrian, after all, and failure was not an option. Yet, as the hours turned into days, her frustration only grew. The challenge was proving to be more difficult than she had anticipated, and the pressure of her own expectations weighed heavily on her. It was in this state of frustration and determination that she first noticed Alex. Alex was a human student, one of the few at the Academy. To most of the other students, he was unremarkable, a quiet, unassuming figure who rarely drew attention to himself. He was the kind of person who could easily be overlooked in the competitive atmosphere of the Academy. Yet there was something about him that caught Valara's eye. While she struggled with the challenge, Alex appeared calm and patient, working quietly at his own pace. Alex's approach to the challenge was different from Valara's. He did not rely on advanced algorithms or the latest technology. Instead, he seemed to approach the problem from a more intuitive angle, using methods that were unorthodox and, to Valara, puzzling. She watched as he made slow, steady progress, quietly piecing together parts of the puzzle that had stumped even the most brilliant minds. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of the frustration that plagued her own efforts. At first, Valara dismissed Alex's work as insignificant. After all, what could a human possibly contribute to a challenge of this magnitude? But as the days passed, she couldn't help but notice that Alex's approach, though unconventional, was yielding results. He was making connections that she had overlooked, finding solutions to small parts of the puzzle that had seemed impossible to solve. It was subtle, almost imperceptible progress, but it was progress nonetheless. As Valara continued to struggle, her initial dismissal of Alex began to waver. There was something about his approach that intrigued her, something that defied her expectations of what a human was capable of. It wasn't that Alex was solving the challenge, at least not yet, but he was making headway in a way that she had not anticipated. He seemed to see the problem from a different perspective, one that was not bound by the rigid logic that had been the foundation of her own work. Despite herself, Valara found her attention drawn more and more to Alex's work. There was a simplicity to his methods, a kind of elegance that contrasted sharply with her own complex and often convoluted approach. It was as if he was seeing the challenge through a different lens, one that allowed him to navigate the intricacies of the problem with a clarity that she could not achieve. Valara's frustration did not diminish, but it began to take on a new form. She was no longer just frustrated with the challenge itself, she was frustrated with her own inability to approach it in the way that Alex seemed to be doing so effortlessly. The more she watched him, the more she began to question her own methods. Was it possible that she had been going about this all wrong? Could there be a solution that lay outside the bounds of her advanced Zephyrian technology and logic? These thoughts gnawed at Valara as she continued her work. She was still determined to solve the challenge, but now, for the first time, she felt a flicker of doubt. Alex's calm, methodical progress was a stark contrast to her own frantic efforts, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. She couldn't help but wonder, what was it that he saw that she did not? As the deadline for the challenge loomed closer, Valara knew she had to make a decision. Would she continue to push forward with her own methods, or would she consider the possibility that there might be another way, one that she had not yet explored? The answer to that question would not only determine the outcome of the challenge, but also force her to confront the very nature of her own genius. Valara's frustration had reached a boiling point. Days had turned into nights, and yet the solution to the impossible challenge remained out of her grasp. Her once unshakable confidence began to erode as each failed attempt piled on her doubts. The algorithms she had relied on, the logic circuits she had designed, none of it was working as expected. The challenge was a maze without an exit, twisting her thoughts into knots she couldn't untangle. For the first time in her life, Valara found herself questioning her own abilities. Was she really the genius everyone believed her to be? Or had she been living in the shadow of her people's expectations, fooling herself into thinking she was invincible? The weight of her self-doubt became unbearable. Every failure felt like a chisel chipping away at her self-worth. She started avoiding her peers, who once looked up to her with admiration. Now their eyes held a flicker of something else, pity perhaps, or worse, doubt. Whispers began to circulate through the halls of the academy, quiet murmurings about how even Valara, the brightest star of the Zephyrians, might not be able to solve the challenge. Her instructors, who had always praised her brilliance, now observed her with a critical eye, their expectations a suffocating presence that only added to her burden. The pressure was immense, and it was crushing her from within. In contrast to Valara's struggle, Alex seemed to be making quiet, steady progress. He worked with a kind of calm detachment, unaffected by the frenzy that gripped the other students. His approach was unconventional, even eccentric by the standards of the academy. While others, like Valara, relied on advanced technology and complex theories, Alex took a different path. He drew on creativity, intuition, and elements from human culture that were alien to his peers. His methods were simple yet effective, grounded in principles that seemed almost primitive in comparison to the cutting-edge techniques the others employed. Yet, it was these very methods that allowed Alex to see what others could not. He approached the challenge not as a problem to be solved, but as a puzzle to be understood. He didn't try to force a solution through sheer intellect. Instead, he let the problem guide him, following its twists and turns with a patient curiosity. Slowly but surely, he began to piece together fragments of a solution, connecting dots that others had overlooked. It wasn't flashy or groundbreaking, but it was progress, and it was steady. Valara couldn't help but notice the small victories Alex seemed to be achieving. At first, she dismissed them as insignificant, the product of a mind that was simply lucky rather than skilled. But as time went on, she began to see a pattern in his work. Alex was uncovering layers of the challenge that she had barely scratched the surface of, finding connections that eluded even her advanced algorithms. It was infuriating, and yet she couldn't deny that he was onto something. One evening, as she pored over her calculations for what felt like the 1,000th time, Valara's frustration boiled over. She decided to confront Alex's work head-on, determined to prove that his approach was nothing more than the fluke of an inferior mind. She studied his notes, his equations, and the strange, almost whimsical diagrams that littered his workspace. At first glance, it all seemed so simple, so naive. But the more she looked, the more she began to see the elegance in his simplicity. Alex's work wasn't just a haphazard collection of ideas. It was a carefully constructed framework, built on principles that were as ancient as they were effective. He was solving the challenge not by brute force, but by understanding its essence, by seeing it as a whole rather than as a series of disconnected problems. It was a perspective that Valara had never considered, and it was one that challenged everything she thought she knew. As she delved deeper into his work, Valara's initial dismissal of Alex turned into something else, curiosity, and then, a reluctant respect. She realized that Alex was not just making progress, he was laying the foundation for a solution, one that might actually work. The revelation was both humbling and terrifying. For the first time, Valara had to confront the possibility that her approach might be flawed, that the very methods she had relied on her entire life were not enough to solve this challenge. The turning point came when Valara, in a moment of desperation, tried to incorporate one of Alex's simpler ideas into her own work. To her surprise, it worked. The piece of the puzzle that had been eluding her for days suddenly fell into place, and with it came the realization that she had been too rigid in her thinking. Alex's approach, though unconventional, was not naive. It was insightful in a way that her advanced methods could not replicate. Valara sat back, staring at her work with a mix of awe and disbelief. She had been so focused on proving her superiority that she had missed the true nature of the challenge. It wasn't just about intellect, it was about perspective, about seeing the problem from angles she had never considered. Alex had done that, and in doing so, he had shown her the path forward. As the weight of her realization settled in, Valara knew that she had a choice to make. She could continue down her current path, clinging to her pride and the methods that had brought her success in the past. Or she could set aside her preconceptions and embrace a new approach, one that might lead to a solution but would require her to acknowledge that she wasn't infallible. In that moment, Valara understood that this challenge was more than just an academic exercise. It was a test of her ability to adapt, to grow beyond the limits she had set for herself. And as much as it pained her to admit it, Alex had shown her the way. The impossible challenge was no longer just a problem to be solved, it was a lesson in humility, in the value of collaboration, and in the realization that sometimes, the simplest solutions are the most powerful. Valara found herself at a crossroads, torn between two conflicting desires. On one hand, her pride, deeply rooted in the Zephyrian belief of intellectual superiority, urged her to continue alone. She had always been the best, the one others looked up to. To ask for help, especially from a human, felt like admitting defeat. The idea gnawed at her, filling her with a deep-seated fear of losing her status as the top student, the very identity she had built over years of relentless hard work. Yet, on the other hand, she couldn't ignore the progress Alex was making. His unconventional methods, though perplexing, were yielding results she couldn't achieve on her own. The dilemma consumed her thoughts. She would pace her room late at night, wrestling with the decision. Every instinct told her to push forward alone, to prove to herself and everyone else that she didn't need help. But with each passing day, the futility of her efforts became more apparent. The challenge was not just a test of intellect, it was a test of adaptability, of being able to think beyond one's own limitations. And as much as it pained her to admit it, Alex had shown her that her limitations were real. Finally, Valara could no longer ignore the truth. Swallowing her pride, she approached Alex, masking her intentions with a veil of curiosity. She pretended to be interested in his approach, casually asking questions about his methods. But Alex was perceptive, and it didn't take long for him to see through her facade. He could sense her frustration, her desperation. Rather than confront her about it, he simply offered his insights, sharing his work with a quiet confidence that lacked any trace of arrogance. As they began to work together, an uneasy alliance formed. Valara, still struggling with her need to maintain control, found it difficult to fully embrace Alex's methods. She would often try to steer the work back towards her own familiar techniques, integrating Zephyrian technology and logic into their efforts. But Alex, with his calm persistence, would gently push back, encouraging her to consider alternatives, to think outside the rigid frameworks that had previously defined her approach. The tension between them was palpable. Valara's instinct was to dominate, to lead the collaboration in the direction she was comfortable with. But every time she tried, Alex would introduce a new idea, one that challenged her traditional ways of thinking. He brought creativity and lateral thinking to the table, elements that were foreign to Valara's highly structured mindset. It frustrated her, but at the same time, she couldn't deny the effectiveness of his ideas. As they delved deeper into the challenge, the pressure mounted. Time was running out, and the stakes were higher than ever. Valara could feel the weight of her peers' expectations bearing down on her, and it only fueled her anxiety. She began to push harder, her need for control growing stronger with each passing day. This led to clashes with Alex, who remained steadfast in his belief that their approach needed to be more flexible, more open to new possibilities. One day, the tension boiled over. They were on the verge of a significant breakthrough, but a disagreement over the next step threatened to derail everything. Valara, in a moment of frustration, insisted on following a path that adhered strictly to Zephyrian logic, dismissing Alex's suggestion as too risky and unproven. Alex, usually patient and calm, stood his ground, arguing that they needed to take that very risk if they were to solve the challenge. For a brief moment, it seemed as though their collaboration might fall apart. Valara, blinded by her need to succeed on her own terms, was ready to abandon the partnership. But as she stared at the complex equations and theories before her, something inside her shifted. She realized that the very reason she was struggling was because she had been too rigid, too focused on doing things the right way, the Zephyrian way. In that moment she saw the truth. The challenge was not about following established methods, but about finding new ones. And to do that, she needed to let go of her pride and trust in the process, even if it meant embracing ideas that made her uncomfortable. Taking a deep breath, Valara conceded. She agreed to follow Alex's suggestion, recognizing that his intuition, though different from hers, had been right all along. They returned to their work with a renewed sense of purpose, blending their approaches in a way that neither of them could have achieved alone. Valara's technological expertise combined with Alex's creative insights created a synergy that propelled them forward, inching closer to the solution that had eluded so many before them. As they worked, the tension between them began to dissipate. Valara started to see Alex not as a rival, but as a partner, someone whose strengths complemented her own. The final push towards the solution was intense, but for the first time, they were truly working together, each bringing their best to the table. The breakthroughs came faster, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a clarity that had been missing before. By the end of the section, they stood on the brink of a breakthrough. The solution was within reach, the culmination of their combined efforts. What had once seemed impossible was now almost within their grasp, and it was clear that neither of them could have done it alone. The challenge was no longer just a test of intellect, it had become a testament to the power of collaboration, of blending different perspectives to achieve something greater than either of them could have imagined. And as they prepared to make the final leap, Valara knew that whatever the outcome, she had already learned the most important lesson of all. The moment had arrived. After days of relentless work, Valara and Alex stood on the brink of solving the impossible challenge. Their final approach was a seamless blend of Zephyrian precision and human creativity, a fusion of technology and intuition that neither of them could have achieved alone. As they made the last crucial adjustments, there was a palpable tension in the air. Valara's fingers hovered over the controls, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at Alex, who gave her a nod of quiet encouragement. With a deep breath, she initiated the final sequence. The solution unfolded before them like a complex symphony, each note in perfect harmony. The data streams aligned, the equations balanced, and the impossible became possible. The challenge that had confounded the brightest minds for centuries was finally conquered. For a moment, there was only silence, a stunned realization of what they had just accomplished. Then, as the magnitude of their achievement sank in, a wave of exhilaration swept over them. Their peers, who had been watching from the sidelines, were the first to react. There was a brief pause, a collective intake of breath, followed by a swell of applause and cheers. The disbelief on their faces quickly turned to admiration as they recognized the brilliance of the solution. Instructors who had once been skeptical now looked on with approval, their expressions a mix of pride and respect. Valara could see the shift in their demeanor, the acknowledgement that what had been achieved here was nothing short of extraordinary. But the true transformation was within Valara herself. As she stood there, basking in the glow of their success, she felt a profound change take root. The pride she had once taken in her own abilities was now tempered by a newfound humility. She realized that her greatest strength was not just her intellect, but her willingness to learn, to adapt, and to embrace the strengths of others. The collaboration with Alex had shown her that genius was not confined to a single species or a single way of thinking. It was a mosaic of ideas, a tapestry woven from diverse perspectives that, when combined, created something truly remarkable. In the aftermath of their success, the impact was immediate. Valara and Alex were hailed as heroes, their names echoing through the halls of the Galactic Academy. Their achievement was not just a victory for them personally, but a milestone for the entire institution. The impossible challenge, once thought unsolvable, had been conquered through the power of collaboration. Their partnership set a new precedent, encouraging more cross-species teamwork and highlighting the importance of diversity in problem-solving. The Academy, once rigid in its traditions, began to open up to new ways of thinking, inspired by the example set by Valara and Alex. For Valara, the experience was transformative. She had always seen herself as a lone genius, a singular force in the universe. But now, she understood that true genius was not about standing alone at the top, but about lifting others up with you, about recognizing the value in every perspective and learning from it. Her future, once defined by her individual achievements, now seemed full of possibilities for collaboration and growth. The lessons she had learned would guide her in ways she had never imagined, shaping her into a leader who understood the power of unity and the strength found in diversity. As the days turned into weeks, the effects of their success continued to ripple through the academy. Other students began to seek out partnerships across species, inspired by the example of Valara and Alex. The rigid barriers that had once defined the academy's culture began to dissolve, replaced by a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. The impossible challenge had not just been a test of intellect, it had been a catalyst for change, opening minds and hearts to the idea that greatness was achieved not in isolation, but through collaboration. In the quiet moments after the challenge, Valara often found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. The path had been difficult, fraught with doubt and conflict, but it had led her to a place of understanding and growth. She realized that being a genius was not about being the smartest or the most capable. It was about being open to new ideas, about recognizing that there was always more to learn, and that sometimes, the most unexpected sources could offer the most profound insights. As Villara and Alex prepared to move on to new challenges, they knew that their work together had only just begun. The success of the impossible challenge was a testament to what they could achieve when they combined their strengths, and they were eager to see what other impossible problems they could solve together. Their partnership had proven that the boundaries between species were artificial, that true innovation came from breaking down those barriers and working as one.